He has trouble and almost loses his house and decides to get really stoned. So that's sort of the plot of the novel. But I want to read one of his poems because I like it. It's called A Brief Political Manifesto. I was driving around the packed Costco parking lot looking for a space and listening to some guy on NPR talk about America's growing suburban poor when I saw this woman with 4 kids, little stepladders, 2, 4, 6, 8, waiting to climb in the car while Mom loaded a cask of peanut butter and pallets of swimsuits into the back of this all-wheel drive vehicle. And the kids were so cute, I waved. And that's when I saw the most amazing thing as the woman bent over to pick up a barrel of grape juice. Her low-rise pants rose low, and right there in the small of her back stretched a single strained string, a thin strap of fabric, yes, the devil's floss, I kid you not, a thong. I swear to God, a thong. Now me, I'm okay with the thong, politically and aesthetically. I'm fine with it being up there or out there, or wherever it happens to be. My only question is, when did Moms start wearing them? Because I remember my mom's underwear. Laundry was one of our chores. We folded those things awkwardly, like fitted sheets. We snapped them like tablecloths. My sister stood on one end, me on the other. And we walked toward each other twice. We folded those things like big American flags. Hats off, respectful, careful not to let them brush the ground. Now I know there are people out there who constantly fret about the fabric of America, gay couples getting married, violent videos, nasty TV, that sort of thing. But it seems to me the fabric of America would be just fine if there was a little bit more of it in our underpants. And that's the issue I'll run on when I eventually run. Getting our moms out of thongs and back into hammocks with leg holes. Since there are people standing, this is the part where I answer questions, and I'll try not to go on too long, but someone has to have the first question, and it's always really hard, and please don't make it argument. Yes?
In Beautiful Rooms, because that is so far the only one I've read of yours. You do a lot with Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, and there's no copy, I guess you can write about them and no problems with that?
We'll find out. First of all, there's the sort of famous thing. If someone is famous, you can write about them in fiction. There's also the thing where if someone is dead, then it's really hard for them to sue you. And then there's a thing called truth, and I sort of allege in there that Richard Burton drinks a lot and is a bit of a womanizer. So I would like my chances in court. But I actually thought it was a really, Elizabeth Taylor doesn't appear in the novel, but as I was researching the novel, and I wrote this book over about a 15-year period where I worked on a million other things. I would start it and come back to it, and early on, my vision for the novel, I had been to Italy with my wife. She's Italian, and I'd sort of fallen in love with the place. And my family tree ends at a freight train in North Dakota in about 1930. I have no idea. So I sort of adopted my wife's background, and I just became really interested in Italy. And when I returned from Italy in 1997, my mom was dying of stomach cancer, and so I started a novel about a woman who has cancer, about my mother's age, who shows up at the last age when I could rewind my mother's life to before she had kids, when she could have maybe gone somewhere else, and my mother had never been to Europe, and so it was a way to sort of take my mother to Europe. That quickly that didn't turn into a novel. There wasn't enough there. It wasn't the way to write about my mother. So I had this young woman arriving in Italy in 1962, and I had to say, who is she? What's she doing here? And I'd started doing a little bit of work in Hollywood. So I thought, well, she's an actress, and I was interested in the ways in which acting and writing are both acts of empathy in a way. And so I wanted to make her an actress. So then I had to figure out what's going on in Italy in 1962, and then I stumbled upon Cleopatra. And the more research I did, I became fascinated with Richard Burton. And so he just sort of worked into a character, and researched it as heavily as I could, and he ended up being a character in the novel. But if you think about it, Lincoln can be a zombie killer or whatever. So historical figures are pretty much open to reinterpretation by fiction writers, thankfully. Yes?
I'm going to concur with the gentleman that you met with today who said every book of yours just is so dramatically different, so applause to you for that. But your writing, you seem to come to metaphors and similes so beautifully. Claire's hair splayed upon the pillow like a suicide, that kind of thing. And I'm wondering, is that something you labor over? Does that come to you naturally as you're writing?
I have a staff for almost all the metaphors.
I need a metaphor,
all
right?
press the button, metaphor department. They're like, broccoli? No. So, no, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that's what the writing is.
Right.
You know, Tim and I were talking about that today. The great thing when you're writing is the things I'm most aware of are the sound, the sentence rhythms. That this was Bit hates going to cardboard. I love the bang bang, and the whole story then became those sort of heavy beats on the hard words and making it as lean as possible. With Beautiful Ruins, I was writing something more expansive, and then when you're describing something, I don't entirely know where it comes from, but I was just imagining her hair, that curly red hair, and the way it clings to the pillow, and I imagined it like a body that had fallen out and was splattered, And then it's trying to make the language, her hair like a splattered dead body would not be. And if you find a metaphor that goes beyond description but starts to move thematically or starts to open up the character, and Claire is a woman who's sad, who's a little bit depressed. So you're just hinting in that way. So it's when you see the final draft of a book, this is a book I worked on for 15 years, so there's not a sentence that stayed the same. I'm constantly going back in and taking those things out, putting them back in, looking for the one that works. So I think it's part of the process of writing, and I'm not sure. Sometimes they're labored over, sometimes they just pop into your head, and the ones that pop into your head, they're just gifts, I remember flying into Boise, Idaho one time, and the plane was banking, and I'm staring out the window, and it was a horrible, jumpy, awful flight, and I looked down, and there's this rumpled farmland, and all of a sudden, perfectly flat land, and I'm staring out the window, and I grab the barf bag, and I write on the barf bag, Boise, Idaho is where flat farmland meets rumpled foothills like a shirt half ironed. When you iron half a shirt. And I still have that barf bag. I need to write something set in Boise, just so.
So you've written 6 novels, right? So, and you said that the Beautiful Ruins took about 15 years. So how many novels do you have? Half written, half stopped? And when you look at even the ones that are been published, how close are they to the original intent that you started with?
I think I've hit about the same as like a shortstop in the 1970s. I'd say about 26% of what I write ever makes it as anything. And other things, but I don't throw anything away, I just set it there. So it wasn't like for those 15 years I thought, boy, wait till they get a load of Beautiful Ruins. I thought, here's a failed novel, but I'll just put it with the other failed novels and I'll go back to it at different times. I think the thing I've learned is a kind of patience. I don't throw anything away. And it's hard in this culture. It moves so fast. If we don't get information, I see people like, why can't I know the weather now? If you don't get information instantly, then there's something wrong. And fiction writing is not like that. It's glacial. It can take... and to answer your second question, how different is the thing, is the result? It's entirely different. In earlier versions of Beautiful Ruins, it took this postmodern twist where I went in my own novel. For a while, I was a character in my own novel, pitching one of my novels, The Zero, which would be sort of unmakeable to a producer. And I was the worst character I've ever written in fiction. I didn't believe my motivation. I didn't even believe the description of myself. 6'1", come on. Isn't he a woman? In other versions, Dee wasn't even alive at the end. So the thing I've learned is to constantly. Pasquale makes this huge journey, gets to America, and it's like, no, she died 2 years ago, thanks for coming, and I thought, well, that's not very satisfying, so I tore it apart and started over, tore that ending apart. In 2007, I went to Italy again to just sort of soak myself up. I'd finished another novel, and had finished The Zero, I guess, and and you know, was thinking, okay, now I'll finally go back to this novel, which at the time was called The Hotel Adequate View. Finally go back to The Hotel Adequate View. I went to Italy, I hiked the Cinque Terre again, I had wine with a friend, and that night, the last night I was in Italy, I went to bed, and all of a sudden the story opened up to me in these ways, and I started writing in my writing journal. I keep a writing journal with me at all times, and I just started writing all these notes to myself. And the last note I wrote, on 35 pages of handwritten notes, the last page I wrote, stayed up all night, the birds are chirping. And I went home and I didn't use any of those notes. But it helped open the characters up. I kind of knew where it was going. And then I wrote until I got stuck again, and then I thought, and it's so big and expansive, I thought I have to write something totally different to get this out of my head. So I wrote The Financial Lives of the Poets, which is the fastest anything's ever come. It came in about 9 months. And it's first person, one voice, takes place in about 4 days. So the scope of it I could sort of manage. And then when I went back to Beautiful Ruins, you know, I could kind of see it again. So sometimes it comes, like, you know, Financial Lives of the Poets came pretty, that novel I sort of saw the entire time. With a book like Beautiful Ruins, it takes longer. There's a novel I've been working on for 20 years that I don't know if I'll ever finish it. And I don't know if anyone would want to read it if I do. But in the meantime, my one superpower is I can switch from one thing to another. If I get stuck, I set it aside and I move on to something else. And flight, I can fly too. Those are 2 superpowers.
Yeah. Beautiful Ruins was a wonderful, wonderful story. Financial Lives of the Poets, I thought the voice is terrific and it's wonderfully funny. And so I wanted to go back and see what else you've written, and then I bought The Zero.
Oh, yeah.
And it is so different, so intense. How did you decide to attack 9/11, especially living outside of New York City? I remember reading that you had gone there on an assignment or something like that.
Yeah, I didn't really decide to write about 9/11. I was, when I was trying to support myself as a writer, I had to do some ghostwriting jobs. And my publisher at the time said, come to New York, meet this. You know, I was researching Citizen Vince, which has a New York cop in it. And she said, come to New York. I know a New York cop. In fact, he's the police commissioner. And I'm like, sure. So, and he's working on his book. He needs someone to help him with it. So I went to New York, and I was Bernard Kerrick's ghostwriter. And sort of got lulled into the job and kind of despised myself for it. And so I was there after the attacks, 5 days after I arrived in New York, and I became, he had finished his book. It was about his childhood. So I arrived in New York and was at Ground Zero for about a month after the attacks, and then, and the novel is really more about our reaction to what happened, and it is a dark, surreal, almost Kafkaesque book. It's very different, and that just felt like the response. I felt after that like my country had gone crazy, like we had a sort of bloodlust for war and for all these things because our very security had been threatened in this way we couldn't recognize. And rather than doing something profound with it or something constructive, instead I felt we retreated in a kind of consumer nationalism. If we don't drink Budweiser, the terrorists have won. They attacked our economy. No, they didn't. They attacked those buildings. I was there, you know.